Hello and welcome back to Rugby Today, where we are going to be diving into week 3 of the Autumn Nations series, which just keeps on rolling. There has been some incredible action through the opening 2 rounds, and week 3 has some incredible matchups that we're going to dive into today. We are looking at a more of a team-on-team focus rather than sort of a match preview, which Joe and myself have already done earlier this week, and you can check that out on FloRugby.com, or you can check it on our YouTube channel where we have a little look ahead with all our predictions for this weekend. Diving into the teams, we are going to start with the team that are up first in terms of the hosts. We have Italy, who are riding high after their strong win over the Wallabies last week. The project under Gonzalo Quesada really looks like it's building nicely at this stage. He's got plenty of depth across the squad, which is great, and there's a real identity as to what they're trying to do. They have that nice creative spark at the back with Ange Capuat. So Paolo Garbisi's really rounding into form as a top quality 10, in particular from the boot, which has been a big area of improvement for him. But most importantly, the pack looks really dynamic. There's plenty of pace across the board there, and also the back row seem to be competing really, really well at the breakdown. Fundamentals of set piece have been pretty good too. So it looks like Quesada is layering on quite nicely there. That clash with the Wallabies in previous generations of Italian teams probably would have got away from them when they'd fallen behind Joe Schmidt's side. But this side just kept fighting, kind of stayed in the battle, which again is a major area of improvement for them on that side of things. Looking at their bench, they've gone with a 6-2 split, which again is an interesting wrinkle and a new development for Quesada. When you look at the back rows they have, in particular David Odiase and Ross Vincent, they kind of are built in that sort of South African Kwagga Smiths and maybe even Andre Esterhuizen, we may say now, mould where they could play in the back line. Vincent in particular is just blessed with top-end pace. So that might be something that we see the Azzurri sort of mess around with going forward. Could we see one of their back rows shifting into the back line if needed with that 6-2 split? Could that become their new sort of future going forward? The biggest thing for them this week against the Boks is going to be, obviously, set piece time is going to be huge for them. If they can't limit the Boks maul game in particular, they're going to be in quite a bit of trouble. Now, they had a good ding-dong battle with the Wallabies, but this Springbok side are on a whole nother level, as they'll be well aware of. So getting a bit of parity at scrum time would be great, and obviously kind of just trying to stay in the fight in those collisions. Looking back on their fixtures against the Boks in July, obviously they had a heavily rotated team back then. They're going to be a lot stronger this week, so make no mistakes about it. Look, a win isn't really the main objective here for Italy. Of course, it would be fantastic if it came up for them, but it's highly unlikely. Really, it's just staying in the fight with the Boks and just pushing the world's best team as much as they possibly can. Trying to stay within 10 points would be a really good return for this Italian team and would kind of continue the sign that they are improving and closing the gap on the top sides. In terms of an area that they probably actually have a slight advantage, the combination of Tommaso Menoncello and Ignacio Brex in the centres is as good as any in the world, and they're facing a very inexperienced pairing of the Springboks this week, which we'll dive into in our next little piece when we look towards the Boks. Again, for Italy, what we would like to see tactically this week is you just don't want to kick possession away to the Boks, because there's not really any area that you can get at them, because at the lineout, the Boks are going to compete hard even on your throw. And if you keep the ball in field, you've got that electric back three of Willemse, Edwil van der Merwe's back in this week, and Kurt Leanse, who can do complete damage. So it would be nice to see Italy trying to maybe retain possession a little bit more than they have recently and trying to go through a multi-phase game. Keep that movement, keep the action, keep the ball in hand, and just try and avoid giving South Africa easy access. Again, we don't necessarily see Italy getting too close, but if they can stay within that 10-point margin, it'll be a really good result for them. On to the Boks, of course. They will go into this one, and Rassie is back at his sort of brilliant best in this one. Without being too much of just a praising Rassie podcast, you have to really admire what he's doing. He's using these November series for exactly what you should do, and he's just building that squad depth once again. So we kind of touched on the inexperienced centres earlier with Ethan Hooker and Keenan Moody. Now that's a really exciting combination between two players that Rassie has drip-fed in over the past few years to really gaining experience. Obviously, Hooker's only new this season, but Keenan's been there for a good while. That combination has the potential to be world-class. Make no mistake about it. Ethan Hooker is a centre by trade, interestingly playing at 12 now rather than what I personally would have expected him to be a 13 is an interesting wrinkle. But what Rassi's very cleverly done is he's paired them up with Hunter Pollard at 10. So he's got plenty of experience. Now, Sasha is, in my opinion, probably he is the best fly half in the world and might well be the best player in the world at the moment on form. But Pollard brings you that solidity and experience to work with these young guys, making sure that the defensive sets are right, making sure everything's nice and clear for them. And then it's the same out back. You know, Edwin van der Merwe's inexperienced, albeit he's in his later 20s, but you've got Damien Willems, who's a double World Cup winner, pulling the strings in terms of the defensive setup from fullback. So that's brilliant. And of course, Curtly Aronson speaks for himself. He's absolutely lethal. So Rassi does a really good job of drip feeding in inexperience, but having experience around them. So players can kind of push themselves and kind of develop their game without really being in a position where they could fail. So it's a really exciting development for them. The same can be said in the pack, where you got Ben Jason Dixon starting. He's a new player, very highly touted, kind of like a Peter Steph Toy 2.0, maybe with a little bit less bulk, but you surround him with two very experienced players in Captain Sia Khaleesi, of course, on that side of things, and and Marco van Staden at number 8, and that's setting him up for success, which is just a really clever way of doing it. The same can be said in the front row, really, when you look at young Zachary Porthen making his second test start here, which is a massive development for South African rugby. He looks like a hell of a prospect and a potentially generational operator at tight head, which is very exciting. Alongside him, you have Johan Grobler and Bowen Venter, neither of whom are much more experienced in terms of caps. But then when you look at what's behind them in the second row, with Franco Mostert and Jean Klein, you've suddenly got nearly 100 caps worth of test experience there. If you mix into the fact that Klein has 7 Springbok tests, but he does have 5 Irish tests there, and of course Mostert has 82 caps. So it's a really nice, clever wrinkle. What's most interesting, though, in this whole setup is that Rassi has now really taken the bench split to a whole nother level. He hasn't named a definite hooker in that position. Now, this is both a short-term and long-term ploy. This week, you'll look at Marco van Staden as the hooker cover in that position there, if things go wrong on that side of things. But long-term, the suspended Jan-Hendrik Wessels can play loosehead and hooker, which then means Rassi might well get to the point where he can play 2 front row placements, and then, as he has this week, have 2 lock cover and 2 back row cover with that sort of mix hybrid players in terms of Kwagga Smith and Andre Esterhuizen. It's just so clever, and it's not just a gimmick in this one. Now, say the Boks get to a World Cup quarterfinal, and they are playing a side that's not necessarily going to challenge them quite as much physically, like, say, a New Zealand might, but might take them on, in the back line, where you're looking at a little bit more of an open, wide game that perhaps the Wallabies get to that stage. Rassi's ability to load up with players who are a little bit more dynamic, with no offense to the front row players amongst us, but he has that opportunity to really load up that bench on extra dynamism and also just really change the picture at line-out time. Imagine, you're bringing on Erge Snyman here and Ruan Norgia. Those are 2 dynamic players who themselves are quite versatile. Obviously, Snyman's firmly a second row, but Norgia can play in the back row. So you suddenly have every eventuality covered, especially with Grant Williams at scrum half cover, given he can cover the wing too. Mali Lebok at 10, but then the starting team have so much versatility. It's a really interesting wrinkle for the world champions. So Rassi tinkering and using November for what it should be, and that's experimentation in these sort of tests. So really exciting developments for the Boks there, and it's just another point where Rassi's probably playing chess while the rest of the world are playing checkers. So good on the Boks. That's really exciting development for them. In terms of a prediction, we've already gone through this on our other podcast, but just to reiterate, I backed the Boks by about 15 to 20 points. Now that might seem steep given how well Italy played last week, but you've got to remember that was against a Wallabies team that were kind of falling off the pace. And it was a great result for Italy, make no mistake, but this Boks team are another beast. So I'm expecting Springboks by, let's say, 15 points. Now we're going to go back to London, where we have England versus New Zealand. England, interestingly, are probably behind the Boks for me on this one in terms of the development. They are probably the next most innovative team in terms of what they're trying to do. Now, it's a very different form of being innovative. I think when you look at the Boks, they can probably play in 3, maybe 4 very distinct different styles, whereas England are kind of leaning into obviously this very kick-heavy approach, and that starts with George Ford. But most importantly, what they're looking to do is not just win the aerial battle. It's get the ball back down, right? So they're not looking to regain possession necessarily with the catch in the air. They're looking to slap it back down. And if you watch them quite closely, what they have done is they have their back rows running these really, really clever support lines. So Ben Earl and Henry Pollock both scored tries against the Wallabies based on what Tom Roebuck in particular did in the air, and just slapping the ball back. Now, in the best case scenario, you get those outcomes where you have your rapid back rows, making a break, scoring tries. That's great. If they don't get to that point and the ball comes down and becomes a competition on the floor, you've suddenly got some of your best jacklers ready to go on the ground there and just slow down the opposition. So it's multifaceted. It's a scoring opportunity. It's a way to regain possession, and at worst, it's a way to really slow down the opposition, get your defense set, get the opposition really slow. They're backtracking, so it makes getting into attacking shapes quite difficult. It's a very clever wrinkle by England. Now, they are obviously facing an All Blacks team who will diffuse this far more efficiently than the Wallabies did, or even Fiji did. In fact, Fiji probably gave them a bit more challenge, but it's just a nice little wrinkle and interesting to see what Borthwick's done. He's also kind of then got to the point where with his bench, he's kind of mirroring his starters in terms of who he's picking. You've got Chandler Cunningham-South can come in for Alex Coles as sort of the hybrid lock back row option there. You've got Tom Curry, what a player to bring off the bench, replacing Sam Underhill as the workhorse at tackle point and breakdown. And then Henry Pollock can either link up with Ben Earl or replace Ben Earl, and you don't lose anything in terms of the dynamism. So really exciting times for England and what they're trying to do just there. Personally, I'd love to see Finn Smith back to head of Ford because I think he can deliver what Ford can in terms of the kicking. He's far more sort of defensively sound, and he's got that bit more of a spark in terms of attack. So he kind of threads the needle between between George Ford and Marcus Smith. So exciting times for England, but I think over time it'll be interesting to see if Smith can get ahead of them. This week, missing Tommy Freeman's a big loss, make no mistake about it. He likely would have started at 13, but when you can call on Ollie Lawrence as your backup outside centre, that's a hell of a place to be in. Lawrence, for me, is arguably the better centre already, just because he's obviously always plays in that position, whereas Freeman's traditionally a winger. So exciting times on that side of things. Ben Spencer covers scrum half off the bench, and then you've got Marcus Smith covering fly half and fullback. So England are probably the next most innovative team for me at this moment in time, ahead of 2 years out from the Rugby World Cup. Whether they really do fulfill their promise still is waiting to be seen, but they are chasing a 10th successive test win, which is a hell of a record for them. Now, their opposition this week, the All Blacks. The All Blacks are really interesting for me this November block, and really stretching back to the Rugby Championship. When they're on and they are playing really well in terms of their bursts that they've had throughout the season, they're as good as any team in the world, Box included. When they drop off, which is what they've been doing throughout fixtures, for sort of those 10, 15, 20-minute blocks, they just look a little bit directionless. They don't get set in terms of their attacking shape very well. The kicking game kind of goes a little bit haywire, and the defensive set, again, isn't great. Also, the competition at the breakdown seems to drop off a touch. Now, that happened against Scotland again, right? So if you look at the first test against Ireland in Chicago, the All Blacks couldn't get ahead of an Irish team that, let's be very clear, was definitely rusty and suffering from a hangover. And really, Ireland aren't very impressive at the moment themselves that week. So they got past them in the final 20 minutes, which just shows that when they do click, they are absolutely lethal and world class. But they aren't doing it consistently like the All Blacks of old. So that's a bit of a work on for Scott Robertson. The same was against Scotland. They came out and blew Scotland off the park in the first half. 17-0 up. It looked lights out. Any other All Blacks team, they go on to win by 40 points. This All Blacks team allowed Scotland to come back to 17-all, which again speaks to Scotland, who did really well. But more for me, it focuses on where New Zealand are weak at the moment, and that is just that they dropped that concentration a notch or two and intensity a notch or two. Against a team like England, they're going to get punished if they do that. If they are not on for at least 65 minutes and really lock in, they're in trouble here. So it'll be a really interesting contest. Aerially, how they deal with England is going to be a fascinating one. They've obviously got great competitors in the air, but I wouldn't suggest that they're necessarily the strongest aerial team. You know, the Springboks are certainly ahead of them in that department. So how they diffuse England's bombs will be really interesting. But where the key difference for the All Blacks might be is that coming off the bench, they can match England. So England aren't going to get that oomph that they've gotten these first 2 weeks, and it'll be interesting to see how they think their way out of this one. So This is a really tight call and a really tough matchup at Allianz Stadium, Twickenham. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. What I would suggest with the All Blacks, it's kind of similar to what we said about Italy, is maybe try and frustrate England a little bit. When they kick the ball to you, just retain possession for a few phases. New Zealand have kind of been like most of the other teams where, if things aren't going well, they'll just kick the ball away after 3-4 phases and then they'll rebuild and they'll go from there. If you could try and stop England from getting possession here and just retain possession yourself, which New Zealand teams are traditionally very good at doing, that has 2 win points for me. 1, it denies England possession that they really want. And 2, it just kind of gives New Zealand a foothold into the game and a chance to kind of get their game breakers going. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go with that one. But the biggest thing for the All Blacks is just staying in the fight and staying in the fight fully for the full 80 minutes, ideally, at least playing really well for 65 minutes and not dropping off massively as they have done at different points in both those previous 2 fixtures. In terms of a prediction, it's a hard one because I probably betted against the All Blacks a couple of times before. I certainly didn't against Scotland. I actually thought they would beat Scotland more comprehensively than they did. Against Ireland, I figured they would win too, so I have picked them in the past 2 weeks, but this week I'm going to veer away a little bit. I think this England team are developing nicely, and I think the All Blacks might struggle with that aerial contest game, especially without Geordie Barrett there. So it's going to be really tight, and I can see it going either way by about 3 or 4 points, but I'm going to say England get their 10th win in a row, and they build on where they are. So England by 2 to 4 points for me in this one. So again, I could see it going either way, but I do think England stopped the All Blacks getting the Grand Slam this season. Now, crossing the Severn Bridge to Cardiff, where let's touch on Wales on this one. Look, conceding 50-odd points at home is pretty poor, but there was definitely things in that Welsh game that are there to be built on. Wales at times just looked naive in this game, and they switched off. Again, this seems to be a recurring theme for a lot of teams at the moment. Wales switched off at certain points, and Argentina punished them. Unlike pretty much any team in the world, Argentina is not the team you want to switch off against. They are absolutely phenomenal on turnover ball. The Welsh wingers seem to be jamming in quite early and trying to give the Argentinians their outside shoulder, and they were exposed on that side of things multiple times. Around the fringes of the ruck, they weren't necessarily getting set too quickly, and again, Argentina exposed them in that area with far too easy breaks on that side of things. But they are facing, again, a team in Japan who physically Wales should be quite a bit ahead of. So that there is opportunities there for them. This week, the big thing will be for Wales, let's play a little bit more pragmatic. When they started getting clicking, the attacking game looked great. Now, they are without Jack Morgan, and that is a big loss. He is the most influential player for Wales, bar none, for any nation at the moment, just because he's so far ahead of the bulk of the Welsh players in terms of quality and experience, that he is a major loss on this one. But I think Wales have the capabilities with the likes of Dowie Lake to really front up and go after Japan. What Ireland did against Japan was they kind of forced things a little bit too early. What they should have done is retain possession and gone direct earlier. Every time Ireland scored, it was generally through a direct play. Jack Crowley's try came after multiple phases of quick direct running, as did Andrew Porter's, which was straight over the line. Paddy McCarthy's was quite opportunistic. And of course, you had Gus McCarthy's one with the line-out drive. Ireland tried to overplay their hand. Wales can't do that because they don't have quite the quality that Ireland did to recover and sort themselves out on that side of things. If they keep this tight, they will physically wear this Japanese team down, and then there'll be opportunities for the likes of Louis Rees-Zammit and co in the last 15 minutes. So the biggest thing for Wales is, can they manage a game? Can they show some maturity early in Steve Tandy's tenure to close out the game? Kick well. When you kick far enough off the pitch that Japan have to go to a line-out, because Japan will constantly search for these quick lineouts, and then you're going to be chasing your tails. So when Wales kick, get the ball far off the park and compete. Make it a set-piece battle, and Wales should win this one quite comfortably. For Japan, the opposite is true. Try and keep the tempo up. Do exactly as you did against Ireland. Just stay in the fight, really run Wales off the park and go for it. Now, again, if Wales decide to take this match by the scruff of the neck, it's going to be really tough for Japan to do that. They have shown that they are technically very good at scrum time, they're technically very good at the maul, and they're technically good at the line-out, even if they lack that little bit of power. So it's not a foregone conclusion that Wales win this one, but really I think Wales do win this one. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, just purely that we don't have massive data on either team yet because they're so early in their infancies with their new coaching staffs. But the easy assumption is that Wales want to go physical and Japan want to go expansive. Now, Wales will in terms of their sort of idea, will want to play expansive, but this is not the game to do it. So I'm tipping Wales by actually a more comfortable margin of about 12 points, just purely based on the disparity in terms of physicality that the two teams can bring on this one. France and Fiji down in Bordeaux. This is going to be a cracker. And really what we saw with France is, I think it's worth getting the elephant in the room spoken about first. It put to bed any notion that they were hard done by at the Rugby World Cup. The Springboks are a better team than France. In everything that France do well, South Africa do slightly better. And that's the hard, cold truth of it. Now, can that gap be closed between here and the next World Cup? Sure it can. Okay, it can. I'm not saying it will. But what France do well is they're very physical at the set piece. South Africa are slightly more physical and more clinical on that side of things. They're really good in the wide channels with Louis Bielbioré, Damien Penaud, Thomas Ramos. South Africa are slightly better in that department too. So really what you saw was the two best teams in the world proving that South Africa are a clear step in front. France are probably a slight notch ahead of, let's say, England, Ireland, New Zealand, maybe Scotland and Argentina in that side of things. So there's three tiers in this one. France are kind of in between those two tiers on that side of things. So I think it was worth getting that out of the way, that it just proved that there is that point and that gap needs to be closed. Now, selection was a big point in that match, and Gregory Aldrit being dropped was just head-scratching. Every time France have dropped Gregory Aldrit, it has not gone well. There is something bizarre with Fabien Galthié in his mind that dropping your best back row, your key leader, is going to be a good idea. Most importantly, Aldrit obviously mentally calms things down. He's a double Champions Cup winning captain, but most importantly, he's your direct, most physical back row forward. You need him for go forward, and now he's back against Fiji. That will be absolutely crucial. I'm not saying he makes the difference between France and South Africa, because I just think South Africa are ahead of France across the board. But I do think when it boiled down to it, he would have made a difference in terms of calming France down and not having that full sort of capitulation that they did later in the contest. Against Fiji, it's going to be very easy for France to want to get into a fast game, because that's what the Fijians want. But really what they're going to have to do is just keep this match in the pack and keep it nice and tight for as long as possible. They have plenty of opportunity to punish Fiji out wide with, again, Bielbioré and Penaud. But really, this is going to be a tight, direct match, and it'll be interesting to see if France can play that way. If France do lose this one or don't perform, I expect Fabien Galthié to be under a heck of a lot of pressure. More pressure than he already is. This French team, make no mistake, has under-delivered based on the player talent that's been there for the last 5-6 years. This was meant to be a French golden generation. Instead, they've got knocked out of a Rugby World Cup quarterfinal. They've only won 2 Six Nations. And I say only 2 because when you compare it with what Ireland have done with a much smaller player base, for example, it's just not good enough. So they have to try and get back to some foundations and kind of get an idea of what they want to do. Defensively, it was very disappointing for France in Paris, and I think Sean Edwards will be pulling his hair out. The line speed dropped off. There was lags in the line generally. And that sort of backfield cover was too easily exposed. You could see France just jamming in. And again, Sacha Feinberg and Gomazulu's try is a perfect point of this side of things. What they did is they knew he was a running threat, but he played it really well and just kept sucking in the French defense and kept finding nice soft shoulders for his teammates to make gain line and get over the gain line. And then he just had the pace to get on the outside. So France need to be more patient and stay to their structure under Edwards on this. For Fiji, they were mightily impressive for me at Twickenham. I actually personally felt they were very hard done by in terms of the match officials on a number of occasions. You know, there was a try disallowed for what was a marginal knock-on, they were calling it. England got away with a try that really you couldn't see the ball grounded, and unless the match officials had another angle that they weren't showing, which you wouldn't suspect they did because they show every TMO angle, that probably shouldn't have been one. There was a few pedantic penalties that went their way, and actually I think they were a lot closer to England than the final scoreline might have suggested. Most impressively with Fiji at the moment is that they've really solidified their set piece comparative to Fijian teams of old. Now they've got plenty of quality. Fiji will always have incredible ball players across the park, but they have a structure that they're playing really well to, which is exciting to see. When there's a turnover, they're going to launch, right? But they are not afraid to go through multi-phase. They're not afraid to kick the ball away, and they're not afraid to compete, which is really important in modern rugby. So by no means is this Fijian team going to be a pushover. I think I'd fully expect them to push France pretty hard in this one. In doing so, what they should do is target the French big ball carriers, in particular Emmanuel Meafu, who's relatively new to Test rugby. But what they should do is target the ball. don't just try and chop them down. They need to target the ball and slow the French down on that side of things. If they can frustrate the French into that style of game, I know we said that we want France to go direct here, but France still want to go direct with quick ball where their forwards are moving forward at a pace of knots. If Fiji can target the ball and slow it down in the tackle, that's going to allow them to get set and not allow France to get any momentum, and thus it's not going to allow their dangerous sort of wingers out wide to get into the game. So really fascinating chess piece in this match. I can't really see anything but a French win. I think France do win probably relatively comfortably. Let's call it 15 points. But it'll be interesting for the first hour in this contest. So plenty to work on for both sides in this one. Now on to Ireland versus Australia, the second late window game on Saturday at the Aviva Stadium. Now this is a really intriguing fixture between two teams who probably looked a little bit disjointed so far in November. Of course, Australia are winless, and really both of those losses were very disappointing. The England one was actually arguably worse than the Italian one for me because they just didn't front up at all. At least against Italy, it was a tight match, and Italy are no easy beats anymore. So make no mistake about that. But the big question here with Australia for me is that I actually think the big issue might be Joe Schmidt. For everything he's done really well, and I don't want to take anything away from him because he picked up a dumpster fire from Eddie Jones and kind of turned it around and set Les Kiss up for success. The attritional game plan of Joe Schmidt is quite concerning with the Wallabies when you look how fatigued they looked against Italy and England. Now, I know they were missing Len Ikitau last week, and they were missing Tom Hooper and Ikitau the week before, and there's no Will Skelton. But it just doesn't feel like Schmidt has adapted the game plan for the players he has, which is concerning. And it's very reminiscent of Ireland in 2019 at the World Cup, where it was too predictable. You can throw a blanket over this Australian attack. Everybody's so narrow. There was a particular phase of play against Italy where Australia went over 18 phases of quick pop balls, all going right, all coming back left, no deception, no passes, one-off carries all the way, easy for Italy read. And if you think Italy are going to read it, Ireland are going to read it, and they're going to turn it over with the likes of Ty Byrne, Caelan Doris, Dan Sheehan, all the poachers that Ireland have. So Australia really need to get a bit of variety into their attacking game. I don't know if they can do it in the space of a week. Len Ikitau does make a big difference to their attacking game. He straightens things up in the back line, but he needs to get the ball for that to happen. If he does, and he gets a few cracks at the likes of Sam Prendergast in particular, then expect things to happen, right? He is the reason that Joseph Suaalii throughout the Rugby Championship was getting outside shoulders, is because Ikitau runs brilliant lines between the centres and just occupies those multiple defenders. And even if he does get tackled, it's quick phase ball, and then the likes of Suaalii and those can strike. So that's really, for the Wallabies, the key point here. James O'Connor back at 10 makes a big difference, and I'm pretty frustrated as a neutral that they aren't backing O'Connor to get to the next World Cup. The guy has been around for so long for sure, but he's playing the best rugby of his career, arguably, in terms of his game management. He looks to be in great shape, and you could feasibly get him to the next World Cup and keep him there as your key general. The young 10s thus far have not proven that they are ready to be test competitors. And why not take the pressure off them and allow O'Connor to really, really shine? So that's the big talking points for the Wallabies on that side of things. The key areas for the Wallabies to go after Ireland, and I'll get on this a little bit more when I talk about Ireland, is obviously at the line-out. Ireland's line-out has been a disaster since the 2023 Rugby World Cup, make no mistake about it, and it's baffling that they have not managed to rectify it. So that's where the Wallabies can really get after them. If they can stop Ireland there, they're going to stop Ireland's launch plays. That goes a long way to winning the match. At the breakdown, what they need to do is they need to chop Ireland, and they need to get the likes of Fraser McWright and Harry Wilson over the ball, because Ireland, again, when they're at their best, the rock is flowing, the ball's moving, Gibson Park is on it. That's where you stop Ireland. Those are the two key points to victory for the Wallabies this week. On the topic of Ireland, let's get the main talking point out of the way nice and early. Sam Prendergast starting at fly half feels more like a rotation that was pre-planned more so than form, because it simply cannot be form, given that Crowley's definitely the player who has performed better for both province and country recently, and arguably since Prendergast has burst onto the scene. So I think Farrell would have come into this window going, I'm going to give Jack back-to-back games to start, give Sam some minutes in the third game with Jack coming off to keep his hand in it. towards the later end of the clash, and then starting against the Springboks, where physically Jack's defence is going to be massive. So I don't want to make a big deal out of that, but I know this is always a talking point with Irish rugby. And actually, really, we all need to take a look inwards and realise that we've got two phenomenally talented young 10s here, as well as the likes of Kieran Frawley, albeit I would have loved to see Frawley had more time as the backup to Crowley and develop those guys, and then filter Prendergast in perhaps this season when he was ready. But here we are. So with that out of the way, looking towards Ireland, the obvious answer is that the line-out needs to be rectified. That's just not been good enough. But there are sort of signs that this could get better. Dan Sheehan always is a little bit ahead of Ronan Kelleher on that side of things, so I think that should steer things up. And Ken Doris starting at number 7. This is something that I feel like I wrote about during the Six Nations, which was, that Doris's long-term position actually feels more like 7 than 8 for me in this one, for a number of reasons. His breakdown work is exceptional. The work rate he gets through all of the distance he covers is really great. And crucially, Josh van der Flier has been an incredible player for Ireland, and I'm not writing him off by any means, but Farrell's kind of given indications recently, especially starting with the Lions, where he didn't pick him for any of the tests, that he might see that van der Flier is slightly declining, which is understandable. Van der Flier is a back row in his 30s, 32, I believe, offhand. Doris can really fill that number 7 shirt, both short-term and long-term, and it frees up the number 8 shirt for Munster's Brian Gleeson, who in my opinion is going to be the long-term number 8 for Ireland. He is just a freakish athlete, and he has started the season really well. Unfortunately, his horrible injury against Leinster rules him out of this block of games, but make no mistake, Brian Gleeson is going to be a world-class number 8 in a couple of years. He brings so much power in the carry. He's a line-out option, and he'll really take the Irish back row to another level. And number 6 is a really interesting position, and it feels firmly up for grabs. Ryan Baird feels to be in the mould of Erchia Sneeman as a real impact option off the bench, more so than a starter, for a number of reasons. Starting with the positive side of things, his power game, pace, and ability to win matchups on the wide channels is huge. So that would be really beneficial in the final 20 minutes. On the slight negative knocks, it's quite clear that a bit of the line-out fallout is falling on him for a lack of concentration, where he drifts in and out of games. You could see Ronan Kelleher pointing towards his head when there was line-out issues going on. It looks like Baird, not to heap all the blame on him, is perhaps at the centre of a few of those issues. And in general, player, there's points where you don't really see him get involved for 5-10 minute stretches, more maybe even at times, which is just not really good enough for number 6, especially when we've got so used to the likes of Peter O'Mahony in number 6 for the last sort of 15 years. So I think when a fit again Cormac Izuchukwu comes back, he and Prendergast showed a heck of a lot last week. That number 6 shirt feels firmly open. And of course, you got Jack Conan as an option there too. Conan starting at number 8 this week is another reason why I feel a bit more confident about the line-out, because he's a good jumper, an underrated jumper on that side of things. And he just brings a nice bit of control to the number 8 shirt. So the balance of that back row looks good, albeit I've still got reservations about Baird. So not focusing too much on that side of things. The line-out's the obvious issue. The next thing I'd love to see Ireland doing is focus on the multi-phase game. We understand that we have gone to a kick phase era because of World Rugby's changed to the sort of blocker laws, which is fair enough. But at the end of the day, Ireland are at their best when they have the ball on a front foot and they're playing multi-phase, as they did against the All Blacks with the try they scored. Ireland looked at their best on that side of things. I know that a transition needs to come towards kick compete, and that can come as we go down the line, if that's where Farrell wants to go, which I don't believe it is. But right now, play to your strengths, play to your multi-phase attack, stop kicking the ball away aimlessly, which has been the clear game plan, because Ireland have not been winning those 50-50 balls. Now, it could click against the Wallabies because they've looked equally poor under the high ball, but I would much rather see Ireland play through the phase count. If they want to kick a little earlier, that's fine, but try and get through a little bit of a phase count, get some momentum, and kick on the front foot, stop kicking on the back foot, which is what Ireland have done recently. So this match, I'm perhaps maybe a bit too positive about Ireland, but I could see them winning it by 9 to 12 points based on the fact that they're now 3 matches into this series, and traditionally they do get better under Farrell. Now I know they didn't get necessarily better last November, but there was quite a lot of circumstances there on that side of things. I think they will get better going into this block, and I think the Wallabies are fading, which is completely understandable given how many test matches they played in quick succession. So Ireland by 9 to 12 points. If it's much closer than that, I won't be shocked, but my gut feel is that it won't be. Now to Sunday with the final match, and trying not to sort of go on for too long on this one. The key talking points heading into this one, we will start with the host, Scotland. That was a heartbreaking loss, and it kind of feels like sort of a feature under Gregor Townsend. Scotland have come so far, but when it comes to really getting over the line, they just don't do it. It was right there for them to do it. They reminded me of Ireland in sort of 2013 when the All Blacks got over the line courtesy of a second take at a conversion by Aaron Cruden following a Ryan Crotty try. So very disappointing for Scotland. And how much of a hangover will there be? Because you could see Sione Tuipulotu was just gutted, as was Finn Russell. It was right there for them, but they could not close it out. The big thing against Los Pumas is they have to hit the ground running because they cannot spot them a lead like they did against the All Blacks, because I don't think this Argentina team will take their foot off the gas. I think they'll keep going. So ironically, these two teams kind of mirror each other. A colleague of mine, Ryan, said a really good point about that Argentina are kind of the Southern Hemisphere version of Scotland, and Scotland are the Northern Hemisphere version of Argentina, in that they both play this brilliant brand of rugby, and on their day, they can beat anyone. The difference is Argentina has beaten everyone, whereas Scotland haven't beaten the big teams of South Africa, New Zealand, Ireland, even France recently. So yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting one. I think the clear distinction in this one is that the Argentina pack for me is probably a touch ahead of the Scottish pack in terms of their power game and the type 5. The back rows are very equal across the board. The back lines are both brilliant, but I think in the type 5, Argentina have the experience, they have the depth, and I think they have the advantage, which is why I think they deserve to be favourites going into this one. For Scotland, it's going to be a case of, look, again, we need to front up and get Finn Russell the ball. Once Finn has the ball, anything's possible. But I think Argentina are going to stop them at source. I'm going to back Argentina to win this one by about, let's say, 6 points. I think it's going to be Argentina by 6. So that's my recap of the matches that are coming up. Of course, you can see our full preview that Joe and I recorded earlier this week, also on the FloRugby channel and on FloRugby.com. Thank you so much for checking in on this video. And if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the biggest talking point for your team this weekend? Let us know in the comments below. Whatever team you support, let us know what do you want to see most from your team this weekend. Thanks again for checking out the video.